Hi, I'm Steve Davis. I'm the lead pastor at South Springs Church. And some of you are at this point saying, if you're the lead pastor, why have I never seen you before? And the answer to that's pretty simple. First part of it is I'm kind of like, I treat myself like a cell phone. You know how you do your cell phone? You get up in the morning, you grab it, you run all day long, you get home that evening, and you're getting ready to go to bed, and you look and you're at 12%. So you're going to charge it for 8 hours, and you do the whole thing over again. That's how I roll. I do 11 months all out, and then I take 1 month, the month is basically July, and I recharge, and then I come out and do it again. And then some of you are saying, but Steve, I was here in June, and I didn't see you then either. Okay, all right, so June was missions month for me. June, I did a missions trip to Armenia where I taught in a seminary over there. I did a mission trip to West Virginia where we working on some really cool opportunities there. By the way, I'm going to be taking this coming up Wednesday, this first Wednesday, and I'll be doing sort of a wrap-up of all the mission stuff I did over the course of June and also all the stuff we've got coming up and everything else, because while this stuff's important, we do things that matter all over the place. We are just really huge on things that matter. And this Wednesday, I'm going to really wrap up a lot of that stuff and explain what's going on. Don't want to miss it. First Wednesday, you come out. It's BYOB, bring your own bag lunch. And we set up around tables, and we talk, and we do communion. Sometimes we have a baptism. It's an awesome time to meet some people. I encourage you, this Wednesday at 7, to come out for that. Now, when it comes to things that matter, I'm almost done with the commercials before the sermon, almost. When it comes to doing things that matter, we don't start overseas, we start here. We do things here that our community is a better place because we're here. That's one of our things. We want the community to know we're here. And one of the things we do every year is our backpack brigade, and that's where we help kids get ready for school. You may not know it. If you live on the one side of 87, you may not know that on the other side of 87, there are an awful lot of people for whom life is very, very difficult. And my wife's a teacher over there, and she can tell you stories about kids who show up for kindergarten without any of the skills or resources they need to succeed. And one of the ways we kind of battle that a little bit is we just give all the kids that need one a backpack with some materials and supplies, and it's a huge thing we do. And if you have not already contributed to that, we're getting close to the end, and Kat will be back there, right there. She's the shy one in the back. And she'll be back after service. You need questions. If not, you can just go, I believe, on our app, and you can give or you can get the backpack. Because we have, if you're new, we have a tradition. We don't do a lot of traditions. This is one of our traditions. We take opportunities to make a difference, and we kick their butts. We don't just barely make goals. We don't do just a little bit. Here's a quarter. No. We take problems and we drop nuclear bombs on problems. That's what we do here. So if you haven't participated, this is how we roll. Get in line. That's what we do, man. We do things that matter. We do them big. Okay. We also allow me to speak on things I want to talk about. And for years, I've had this idea for a series that I wanted to do. Because a lot of people have a favorite book of the Bible. If you've been a Christian a long time, you might have a book of the Bible that you just love. And if you've been a Christian long, you might have some people even have a chapter. Romans chapter 8 is an amazing chapter. A lot of you have a favorite chapter in the Bible. And many, many Christians have a favorite verse in the Bible. They call it a life verse or a favorite verse. Me, I have a favorite word in the Bible. I have one word that is my absolute favorite word, and that word is but. And so today, we're starting a series on the Bible's best buts, because when the word but comes up, what it means is things are shifting, things are changing, and I like the ones that are momentous, the ones that are incredibly powerful, the ones that are really big. In other words, I like big buts. Okay? Can't lie about that. I had to bring it up at some point, or you're going to make it. Okay. You needed me to do that for you. Because you were stressing out. Everyone, he's going to do that. I have to not talk about. We talk about things you're not supposed to talk about all the time. One of the reasons, though, that word is so big and huge for me is because one of the verses in the Bible that starts with the word but radically transformed my life. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, Jesus said, but seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. I've got a huge story I tell about how that impacted my life, but just take my word for it. This verse changed my life in incredible ways. Now, what a lot of us don't know is that it is actually Jesus translating and updating a proverb. There's a proverb which says a very similar thing. In Proverbs chapter 3, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he'll make your paths straight." He'll make your paths straight. Now, anybody here feel like your path is straight? Anybody sometimes feel like your path's a little crooked? A little crazy, a little out of control. Okay? Well, he says, trust in the Lord, and he'll make your life straight, which means uncluttered and centered. When you trust in the Lord, when you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, you make your life straight. Because trusting God means centering your life around his person and his principles. And when you are doing that, when you are centering your life on God's person and his principles, when you are spending time with God and he is the center of your life and his principles, his standards are how you're living your life, it will make your life straight. Now, let me ask you a question. What's going to happen if you're not trusting the Lord with all your heart? What's going to happen if you're not centering your life on his principles and his person? What's going to happen? Your life's going to become crooked. It's not going to be straight. Okay? And today, we're going to look at one of my absolute favorite people in the Bible. I mean, this dude is among my favorite people, especially his early life. His name is David. And spoiler alert, David is going to become the king of Israel. He's going to become the greatest king of Israel, the most powerful, the bestest of them. And interestingly, David's life, we can tell David's life story by going from but to but to but. There's a series of verses that start with the word but that drive David's life, and they climax with one verse which is on my Mount Rushmore of the best buts in the Bible. I mean, it's an incredible verse, one of my all-time favorites, and we're going to work our way there as we work our way through the life of David. So we're just going to tell his story up until he becomes king and find some points along the way. So, Israel, nation, God has called forth one nation because he wants to bless the entire world. That nation is called Israel. At some point, they eventually end up with a king. His name is Saul. And when it comes to being a king, Saul was really bad at it. He had the leadership skills. He had everything it would take, except, you know what he didn't do? He didn't trust in the Lord with all his heart and lean not on his own understanding. So his reign as king was incredibly crooked. It was just messed up. And finally, he does something that is just annoys God so much that God comes to a prophet named Samuel. And the book of Samuel he's the center character in it. So the book is called Samuel. And God comes to Samuel and talking about Saul, says, "But now your kingdom, Saul's kingdom, will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart." After his own heart. What would that look like? After his heart would be somebody who trusts in the Lord with all his heart. Okay? "And appointed him ruler of his people because you have not kept the Lord's command." So God comes to Samuel and says, "I want you to find the next king. I'm going to lead you, I should say, to the next king. We got another guy in line." So Samuel goes to this guy's house named Jesse. And Jesse has 8 sons. There's not a lot of mention of his wife because can you imagine that poor woman with 8 sons? Let's not dwell on that. That's sad. We're not going to go there. Okay? And so Samuel goes to Jesse's house because God says the next king is one of Jesse's boys. Okay? Not Jesse's girl, Jesse's boys. I had to say that one too, or you'd have been thinking it without me. Okay. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, the oldest, and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." Look at that guy. Isn't that dude impressive? That's obviously the next king. So he gets his oil flask, because to make somebody king, you anoint him, you get an oil flask out and you pour oil in their head, because I have no idea why. That's what they did. Okay? So he's unhooking the oil flask, getting ready. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, because God is looking for a king after his own heart, someone who trusts in the Lord with all his heart. Hey, we got another recurring word going, okay? So he asked Jesse. Jesse pulls out, okay, it was not the oldest, how about the second? So he pulls out number 2. And God says, nah. Number 3, nah. Number 4, nah. Number 5, Samuel's starting to sweat just a little bit. Nah. Number 6, nope. Number 7, So he asked Jesse, are these all the sons you have? Because he told me to come here, and you seem to be out of boys. Okay, and I'm pretty sure he said anoint a king. Kings are boys. I'm looking for a boy. You're out of boys. What are we going to do? There is still the youngest, Jesse answered. He is tending the sheep. In other words, the prophet is coming. I consider this son so unimportant, I'm not bringing him to the party. Okay, he gets to stay out with the sheep while we have a party to celebrate the prophet, because I do not value this son that highly. Okay? Samuel said, send for him. Will not sit down until he arrives. So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health, had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. So David, the one after God's own heart, has God's Spirit on him powerfully. Okay? So let me tell you something about David, though, about life, about trusting the Lord. Because trusting the Lord makes your life straight. What do you think David's life's going to look like from now on? If you didn't know the story at all, I've got a dude who has been anointed to be the next king of Israel. He trusts in the Lord with all his heart. He is a man after God's own heart, and we know that if you trust in the Lord with all your heart, he'll make your path. So what's his life going to look like? It's going to be straight through some really bad times. Because trusting God doesn't make life easy, it makes it straight. Okay? It makes it straight. It gives you a direction, it centers you, it doesn't exempt you from problems. It simply means that as you go through those problems, because your life is centered on God's principles and his person, you have the ability to make it through the problems. Okay? I mean, Psalm 23, right, says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he's with me. I need to stop it for a second and thank Barry for that amazing series he did on suffering. He did a great job while I was gone, he always does. And I tell you, going above and beyond, doing a sermon on suffering and breaking his foot as he starts it, that's just, I mean, I am not that committed, dude. I am not that committed. But I applaud you for that. So David has been anointed to be the king. And his story does not get easy. It starts out really good. The very next chapter, there's this little thing. You may have heard of David and Goliath. Even if you're not a church person, you've heard of David and Goliath. David is a teenager. He goes out, kills a giant, big victory for the army of the Israelites. And it immediately transports David into being the most powerful general. He's a teenager, maybe early 20s at best, and he is the most powerful general in the nation of Israel. The best dude in the army is David. Matter of fact, they write songs about David. One of them, it tops the download charts for Spotify and iTunes. I'm modernizing it a touch. Is about David. Now, he then gets to marry the king's daughter and live in the palace. So he's been anointed king. There are songs about him all over the radio. And he's married to the king's daughter. A lot of us, we think that means straight. What happens next? Well, let's go back to Saul, the king of Israel, the one who got rejected as being king, but who still holds the job, still gets the paycheck, and still gets to live in the palace. How do you think he views the top song being about David? Yeah, he doesn't handle this well at all. He starts throwing things at David. And by throwing things, I don't mean dishes, I mean spears. And it reaches the point where David's wife has to lower him out a window so he can escape before Saul kills him in his bed. And David spends the next few years on the run, hiding in the wilderness. He ends up with about 300-400 guys who really are loyal to him, and they end up following him, although some of them are just kind of the riffraff. So it's a combination of really good guys and some riffraff. He's got about 300 or 400 of them. And he's hiding in the wilderness, and it goes on for months. And every time Saul gets a break, he goes and chases David in the wilderness. At one point, David is on one side of a mountain, and Saul and his army are on the other side, working their way around to kill David. And God arranges it so the Philistines attack. At that moment, word gets to Saul saying, sorry, dude, hate to pull you off your vendetta thing, but you need to come back home because we got more important stuff than the guy running around the wilderness. Another time, this is my favorite, David is running from Saul. Saul and his army are chasing him, and they're in a mountainous region, and there are caves. And David and his men find a cave that opens up small but gets really big inside. And they think, this is a good place to hide. So they all go hide in the cave. Shh, we're in the cave. And Saul and his army are passing by the cave. And Saul looks up and sees the cave and realizes, I've got business to take care of that I'd rather do privately. You know, he has to go to the bathroom. And it's not the kind you do behind a tree. It's the kind you take your phone for. So Saul leaves his army behind, comes up into the cave that looks like a bathroom to him. And he goes in and he gets himself situated to take care of business. Now, which way are you going to face if you're taking care of business in a cave? I'm facing the light. So Saul is completely useless. He's helpless. Okay? He's been caught with his pants down if he wore pants. And David is behind him with his entire army of 300-400 guys. One of them says, there you go. That's it right there. God has delivered him into your hands. You can take care of everything right now. And David actually takes a knife. I'm guessing he put it in his mouth, and he crawls to the front of the cave where Saul is. And in his mind, because David trusts in the Lord with all his heart, he remembers, I'm the anointed next king of Israel, but this is the anointed current king of Israel. God's anointing is on this man. I'm not allowed to touch him. So David takes his knife and he cuts off part of Saul's robe and he puts it back in his pocket if he had a pocket, and he crawls to the back of the cave. Now, it doesn't say what part of the robe David cut off. Now, I know if I were David, what part I would have cut off. But we don't know if that's what David did. All we know is that David cut off a piece of the robe, and when Saul finished up his business and all the paperwork and all that stuff went back out, that David walks to the front of the cave and holds it up and says, Saul, look, I had you. I had a knife at your back. I could have taken you out. I am not going to harm you, Saul. You do not need to worry about me. Worry about trusting God or something like that. And Saul's all repentant and sorry, and I'll never bother you again until the next time Saul wants to bother him again. And the next big time, Saul is coming at him with his army, and they're in a field, and David's army is really close. David and his guys are really, really close by. And they look, and they notice that everybody in the camp is asleep. Everybody in Saul's army, everybody there is asleep. Well, what's going on? The guys on sentry, they're asleep. And as they look, they see that it's a really deep sleep. And David and one of his key leaders goes down into the camp, and they get closer and closer, and they're going, what's going on? And they realize after a little bit that it's like God put everybody to sleep. Everybody's knocked out. Matter of fact, it talks about Saul being asleep the way that Adam was put to sleep so they could take the rib out of him. I mean, this is a serious anesthetic sleep. They're all wiped out of sleep. And David and his number one general or dude walk up beside, and they're standing beside Saul, who is sound asleep. And right beside him is Saul's spear. The one he used to throw at David, it's right here. And the number 2 guy's going, do it. Do it. And David's like, tell you what, I'll do it. Number 2 says, I know you can't touch the anointed. I'll touch him for you. I'll touch him. I'll take his own spear, and it's over. And David's like, I'm not allowed to delegate evil either. If it's wrong to touch the Lord's anointed, if my life is centered on God's principles mean not only can I not do bad, I can't delegate bad to somebody else. So instead, David takes the spear and he takes Saul's water jug. Saul would have had a pit water jug, not a holy mountaineer water jug. Maybe UNC. He could have had UNC. David pulls out, walks back up out of the camp, and again yells, and now God lets everybody wake up, and they all look, and there he is. And it's Saul's UNC water jug and his spear. That's his spear. And he says, Saul, I'm not going to hurt you. You don't have to chase me down. And Saul's all repentant. He goes back. But the word but changes direction. The word but always means something is going to be different now. And the next chapter, after that big thing with them all asleep, the very next chapter starts this way. But, oh man, things were going good, really. But, David thought to himself, one of these days, I will be destroyed by the hand of Saul. What's he really saying? One of these days, God's not going to protect me. One of these days, God's not going to stop Saul from the other side of the mountain. One of the times, Saul's going to notice that we're in the cave. One of the times, Saul's not going to be asleep when we're nearby. In other words, I cannot trust God. David thought to himself, one of these days I'll be destroyed by the hand of Saul. The best thing I can do is escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will give up searching for me anywhere in Israel, and I will slip out of his hand. David, your life was centered on God's principles and his person. You were trusting in the Lord with all your heart. You were not leaning on your understanding. And he was making your ways straight. Remember this? Trust the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he'll make your paths straight. David has just chosen to no longer trust God. So what's going to happen to his path? Dude, is it going to get crooked? It is going to go from a path of trusting God and God doing miracles in his life and God just working to keep him safe and in his hand to a life that is completely screwed up. Because David moves to the land of the Philistines. Remember David and Goliath? Remember the battle? They're the ones they fight all the time. He goes to the land of the Philistines and he goes to one of the kings of one of the city kings, one of the city states. He says, can I serve you for a while? The guy says, okay. David earns his trust. The king actually gives him a small town called Ziklag. And this is how it works. David is serving a king of the enemy of God. He is going out on a regular basis and raiding surrounding villages. And when he raids the villages, he kills everyone. Every man, every woman, and every child, because no one can get back to tell on him. And when he's done taking the plunder, he takes a huge chunk of the plunder to the Philistine king and gives it to him and says, oh, today I raided, and he names a place in Israel. So he's murdering women and children, lying to the king, and it's about to get worse. Because every year they have a war with Israel. It's what they do. They fight over, there's border skirmishes. And the Philistines are about ready to mount a big one. And the king looks at David and says, "You've got 300-400 guys there, right?" "Yeah." "Come on, we're about to go fight Israel." That's a crooked path right there, dude. And the king brings David, he volunteers him to come along. They get to where the army of the Philistines is all gathered, and the other kings look at David and go, "Yeah, no. All he's got to do is turn on us in battle, and he's back in good graces." One king volunteered him, the others all unvolunteered him, and Dave and his men have to slip back to their little garbage village of Ziklag. See, when you don't follow God, when you don't trust in God, here's how it puts it. You don't have a straight path. You're traveling paths that go nowhere, wandering in a maze of detours and dead ends. And I don't know if that applies to anybody where you are in your life right now. Traveling paths that go nowhere, wandering in a maze of detours and dead ends. But David is now wandering back to Ziklag. And it says, when David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. While David has been off with the Philistines, another raiding party has come and done to his village what David had done to those villages, except they didn't kill everybody. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David's two wives had been captured, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking and stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. David has gone from living in the palace, the anointed next king of Israel, the most powerful man, the man they're singing songs about, to standing in the burnt-out wreckage of his home with his wives and his children kidnapped, and the men who have been faithfully following him seriously considering stoning him to death. You know what would be a really good time? What word would be a really good time for a word to show up? It'd be a really good time for that word. Don't you think it'd be a good time for that word? Because when you get really at the bottom, that's a really good time for but. And guess what word shows up? But David found strength in the Lord his God. Everything had been taken away. Everything was gone. There was nothing left, not even the respect of his men. But David chose to find strength in the Lord his God. What do you think's going to happen now? What's going to happen to his path now? Let's see. So David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" "Pursue them," he answered. "You'll certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his two wives. Nothing was missing. Young or old, boy or girl, plunder, or anything else they had taken. David brought everything back. Immediately, his life starts to rebound. He starts getting straightness back into his life. Reminds me, of course, trust in the Lord with all your heart. But the first verse we started with, we started with a different verse. We didn't start with trust in the Lord with all your heart. We started with what? But seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And what had been taken away? All of David's stuff. What he got given back when he started trusting God? All his stuff. But wait, there's more. Because where had David been? Why had he left his town alone? Why had he left Ziklag? Why was David not hanging out with his homies at his house? Because the Philistines were getting ready to what? Go to war against Israel. So at the same time, okay, these two chapter 30 of 1 Samuel and chapter 31 are happening at basically the same time. These are simultaneous. This is not one then the other. David walks away from the Philistines and he goes back to his place to find it burned down. The Philistines do what? They go north to Israel to go to war. So simultaneous to David choosing to find strength in the Lord his God, the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons. Oh, we hadn't thought about that. Who becomes king when a king dies? So what happens if David kills Saul in that cave? His son Jonathan becomes king. What happens if David's friend takes a spear and drives it through Saul's heart as he lays there sleeping? Who becomes king? David's best friend Jonathan becomes king. But the Philistines are in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons. And they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul. And when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it, so Saul took his sword and fell on it. Within hours of David forsaking the crooked path to go back to trusting God, every major obstacle to him becoming the king of Israel had been eliminated. He was ruling over the tribe of Judah within a few days. And it was inevitable at that point he would rule over the entire nation of Israel, as God had anointed him. But it did not happen until he found strength in the Lord his God. It did not happen until he trusted in the Lord with all his heart and submitted to God, till he centered his life on God's person and his principles. When that happened, trusting God provides purpose and protection. Now that was cheery. Let's tie it back to the previous series about suffering and bad things. Because it's really important you understand that when we trust God, it provides protection. What happens when we don't trust God? See, one of the things that trusting God does, because it provides protection, it provides protection for our own stupidity. You ever done something really dumb and got by with it? Like this could have ruined me, but I'm okay. A lot of times that's God protecting you because you're trusting him. You're trying to live for him, but you just screw up once in a while because we're screwed up people. But God protects us. God pours grace over us when we're trying. When we're seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness, he pours protection all over us. And a lot of times, now, I'm not saying that when bad things happen, it's because you did something wrong, God. But sometimes it is when bad things happen. You're just getting the results of your own bad decisions. Barry and I talk about this all the time. Somebody will come in and talk to us about, I've got this and this and this, and we're going, well, obviously. You did this, this, and this, and the natural result of this, this, and this is this, this, and this. In the movie Liar, Liar, that's a Jim Carrey movie where Jim Carrey plays Jim Carrey. There's a scene right after, because in the movie, his son gets a spell put on him, and he has to tell the truth. And so he's been this lying, needling lawyer who just lies constantly, and suddenly he has to tell the truth. And one of his, as he's trying to figure out what's going on in his life, one of his clients calls, and he's been arrested. And Jim Carrey walks up to the phone, and the secretary says, Tank's been arrested again. He wants to know what he should do. Jim Carrey picks up the phone and goes, "Stop breaking the law." He really cuts down on the arrest record. And a lot of times, we do dumb things and we're hoping God will make it never hurt us. But, I'm going to throw you a really heavy thought. One of the kindest things God can do sometimes is strip us of everything else until we have no one or nothing left to trust but him. Sometimes he graciously allows us to face the ramifications of our bad decisions. Sometimes he graciously allows what we do wrong to impact us negatively, so we'll quit trusting in those things. Because all of us have a tendency to trust things other than God. We trust our abilities, we trust our skills, we trust our connections, we trust the people we like, we trust we trust our money, we trust our stuff, we trust everything except God. And sometimes the most kind thing God can do, when we're in one of those trust everything but God modes, is to let everything but God let us down. And there is a tendency when you are standing in the burnout rubble of your own life to want to say, God, what are you doing to me? And what God is doing to you sometimes is saying, I needed to take everything away so the only direction you could look at was up. David, you've been trusting these 300 men, these 400 men have been following you around. I don't want you to trust them anymore, so they're going to get ready and stone you to death if you're not careful. You've trusted your charm, you've trusted your military ability, you've trusted everything but me for these last little bit, and I'm going to take all that away, so you have to trust me. You may be at a spot in your life where your life is incredibly crooked, chaotic, out of control. And sometimes that happens and we didn't do anything, but an awful lot of times it happens because we've been making really bad choices and not trusting God. And he lets us take the repercussions of our own decisions. So we'll start looking back at him. I have a feeling there's at least one person here or online, and I just described your life. We just played This Is Your Life, and you won. You have a choice. David standing in the burnout rubble of his home. The men are talking about stoning him. He had options. He's still a charmer. He could have done a speech. Now, guys, you know, we've been through a lot. We can do this again. He could have done the rah-rah thing. He could have pulled it out. He could have cut and run. He could have just headed for the hills, said, okay, I'll rebuild. He had options. You always have more options. There's always one more play you think you can make. There's always one more thing you think you can do to try to get to that spot. Quit it. Quit it. Trust in the Lord. If you're a follower of Christ and you have let other things come into your life and your life has gotten incredibly crooked, or maybe you've just started to let some bad things into your life. You've just started to move away from God's person and his principles. You've just started to distrust him, and things are just getting a little bit crooked. Sometimes life is a crooked road like the road between, here in Lillington. And sometimes life is a crooked road like a West Virginia back road. Okay? If your road's starting to get crooked, don't wait till it becomes the road to my grandma's house. Start trusting God now. If you're not a follower of Christ, recognize this means you. That trusting in the Lord is the ultimate goal for you. God wants you to trust in Jesus Christ. And if you'd like to talk to us about having a relationship with Jesus Christ, in trusting in Jesus with all your heart, seeking first God's kingdom and his righteousness through Jesus Christ, what we do, if you're in the auditorium, we've got these blue bags, and we've got some blue bags on the sides of the stage, and we've got some in the back. And if you grab a blue bag, there's people here that are trained, and we'll line you up with somebody, and they'll take about 10 minutes. They'll unpack one of the bags with you and show you how to have a relationship with Christ. If you're online, we have an online blue bag that you can look up right here. Just type that in exactly. rebrand.ly/SSC blue bag online. Or, easier, email steve@spoutsprings.org and we'll line it up. We'll talk to you about how to have a relationship with Christ. One of the ways we express our trust for God, once we've accepted Christ, is to be baptized. If you've never been baptized, just email baptism@spousesprings.org. We'll line that up for you. If you'd like to be part of our church, you'd like to have a conversation with us about becoming part of Spouse Springs Church, doing things that matter with us, we do an orientation chat with me or one of the pastors or one of the elders, where we just talk through your story, how God's worked in your life. We talk through the church's story, how God's worked here. And then we talk through how we can work together so you can become the person God created you to be, and together we can do things that matter, okay? So that's there. That's all there, okay? But also, one more thing. We've also got a cross in the corner. If you'd like to pray about something, if God's spoken to you today during this next song, you can just wander over there. Or if you're going to pray with somebody, we've got people right here and here. We're glad to talk to you. If you want to take communion, we've got communion stations there. But whether you're here or whether you're online, let me say one more thing to you. I like this message. I've been telling this David story for years. I love it. It's one of my favorite stories. I don't do it very often, but I love it. It can be very powerful. It impacts my life when I tell the story. But if you're not careful, you can have followed along with every point and even gotten the warm fuzzies. But if you don't do something about it, it's just another story. If you don't commit to saying, I want to live that life that trusts God, and I'm going to do this, it's just a hopefully good church service. Those are a dime a dozen. If you want your life changed, if you want your road straight, don't just walk out of here. Walk out of here with a commitment to take steps to trusting God with everything you've got. Can I pray for us? Father, I thank you for the life of David. I thank you for what you teach us through it. Father, help us to center ourselves on your person and your principles, trusting you in everything. And Father, we also always want to remember that we've got church people here, people we're friends with, who because of our community they're far away from home. Some are deployed, some are doing temporary duty, some are in harm's way. We want to pray for them. Help them to trust you in this time. For the families that are still here, it can get really hard to trust you. Help them to do that, to trust you. And Father, for even the ones who aren't military or don't have anybody in that situation, we've got people here who need a little boost in trusting you today. They need an encouragement because they need to trust you right now. I pray they do that. We pray that in everything we do, we would trust in you and seek first your kingdom and your righteousness. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.